Let's bring in Jim Anderson. He is a tech analyst and CEO of SocialFlow.com, joining us from New York via Skype. Many thanks for speaking to us on Al Jazeera, Jim. Why do you think TikTok has made this move now?
Well, I think TikTok it realizes it's got a challenge and a problem just like all of these other tech platforms. And remember, TikTok has still got its Chinese ownership problem. They're still governed by the executive order by now former President Donald Trump in terms of having to be divested from the Chinese company that owns them, ByteDance. So I think the last thing they want is further controversy. And these are really thorny issues of free speech versus hate speech versus potential incitements to violence. And I think they realize they have to do something.
And how exactly will it work? Because presumably it can be quite complicated in some cases to work out what is correct information and what is not.
You just nailed the question right there. I mean, how exactly is this going to work is the unanswerable question. Fact-checking sounds very good, and I think most of us are in favor of true and honest information being disseminated, and we don't like it when we see lies or things that are patently false. But trying to figure out how you systematically judge that, and if you outsource it to a group of fact-checkers, one of the common criticisms is who fact-checks the fact-checkers? And these complicated topics are rarely yes or no answers. I mean, it's one thing to say that the world is flat versus the world is round. I think there's enough scientific consensus where most people will agree with you that the world is not flat. But when you talk about issues such as election fraud, climate change, coronavirus, these are extraordinarily complex topics that are not very well suited to simple yes or no answers, or this is factual, this is not.
Indeed. Twitter, of course, one of the more famous examples for shutting down Trump's account. But it's also faced quite a lot of backlash, hasn't it, by some of its users, that it removes too much information.
It has, and there is a very fair debate about how much is too much in terms of suppressing content, or as some people would say, censoring content. I think the key to remember, especially in the United States, is the world changed in a very dramatic fashion on January 6th. When we saw the insurrection at the Capitol, prior to that, I think most of the social platforms and the big tech platforms generally assumed that, okay, even if the language is a bit rough, if it's aggressive, if it's volatile language, that's free speech, and we're going to err on the side of supporting or at least allowing free speech. Post January 6th, when we saw that language ultimately turn into violence, real world violence, the platforms changed their attitude. And that's when you saw President Trump, then President Trump's Twitter account, be banned permanently for a tweet that was actually relatively innocuous. When you read it, he said, "I'm not going to attend the inauguration of Joe Biden." That was a fairly innocuous tweet, except Twitter, judged and said, well, that could be viewed as an incitement to violence by his supporters.
You say January 6th is perhaps when most of the social media platforms really started to take this seriously. But this phenomenon of misinformation on social media, that's been around for a while. Where does that stem from? When did it become a real problem?
Well, it's been a problem forever, right? Any kind of information, even back in the days of newspapers, right? Who guarantees that what's printed in a newspaper is factually accurate? There have been tabloids for, probably more than a century that have printed things that are not true. The key difference with social networks, though, is these algorithms, right? I think most people don't really sit down and think that what I see on TikTok and what you see on TikTok are two completely different things, or Twitter or Facebook or really almost any social network. Those algorithms are constantly curating and cultivating content to present to me, to present to you, to present to everybody individually. And that ends up creating a filter bubble and a reinforcing loop so that if you start to consume content that is of dubious truth, we'll say, or outright misinformation, you'll get more of it. And then the content creators who produce that content are rewarded with greater reach. And so there's very much a self-reinforcing cycle that when you start to consume that kind of content, you're going to get more of it.
We've seen many far-right users moving to so-called deep sites to express their views. How will this affect the landscape of social media?
Well, I think you'll continue to see that. And Parler was a good example. It wasn't really a deep site. It was a very commonly accessible application on mobile devices and became very popular. And you saw what happened to that. They ended up being deplatformed after January 6th for all of the same reasons I just described. So now you effectively do have to go to the darker regions of the web where you don't have this deplatforming option. The flip side of that is it exists. It existed before January 6th. It'll exist probably for a long time to come. It's very hard to to build a big audience there. One of the real differentiators about what President Trump was able to do on Twitter, and even if you look at Parler, what they were able to do was to generate massive audiences very quickly. You're not going to generate massive audiences on these dark sites very likely at all. It's just too hard. It's fairly technical to get to them, and they don't reach mainstream users. So yes, that will occur, and I think that will continue to be the case for a long time to come. I don't think you'll see the numbers and the reach and the significance from those that you did from some of the other applications.
Jim, very good to talk to you and get your thoughts on this. Jim Anderson, tech analyst and CEO of SocialFlow.com.
Thank you.